Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know the drill, right? Smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring that bell icon so you don't miss any of our deep dives. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into a pivotal chapter in India's fight for freedom, the Home Rule movement.
That's right.
And, this one is a must-know for all you new UPSC aspirants out there, especially if you're prepping for your GS1 Modern Indian History.
Absolutely.
But hey, even if exams aren't on your mind right now, this deep dive is a fascinating look into a really important part of Indian history.
Yeah. What makes the Home Rule movement so interesting is that it kind of came up during a time of global turmoil, World War I.
Right.
Think about it. The world is in chaos, but in the middle of all that, this desire for self-rule in India, it really starts to pick up steam.
Yeah.
It really shows how deep this yearning for freedom ran within Indian society.
So before we jump into the movement itself, can you take us back a little bit?
Sure.
And explain, what led to the rise of the Home Rule movement?
Absolutely. We can't really understand this movement without looking back at the Government of India Act of 1909.
Okay.
While it did promise some reforms, it just didn't deliver the kind of self-governance that many Indians were hoping for.
Right.
It was a reminder for many that the real power still remained in British hands.
This must have been a major setback for those who were really pushing for more autonomy.
Yeah, it was. And then, in 1907, the Congress Party, which had been leading the nationalist movement.
Right.
It experienced a split
Oh.
between the moderates who favored a more gradual approach to reform
Okay.
and the extremists who demanded more immediate radical change.
Oh, I see.
This division, along with the imprisonment of Bal Gangadhar Tilak,
Oh, right.
a prominent nationalist leader from 1908 to 1914,
Yeah.
this led to a period of, I would say, relative inactivity in the movement.
So you had unfulfilled promises from the British,
Yeah.
and you also had internal divisions within the Indian nationalist movement. And then, as you mentioned, World War I breaks out.
Right.
Did this change things?
Oh, absolutely. The war was a unique opportunity for India. Annie Besant, a prominent figure in the Home Rule movement, famously said,
Okay.
England's need is India's opportunity.
Okay.
Indians saw that Britain was, busy with the war,
Yeah.
and they saw that as a chance to push harder for their own autonomy.
It's fascinating how a global crisis can sometimes create opportunities for local movements.
Definitely.
So as the Home Rule movement gained momentum, two key figures kind of emerged.
Yeah.
Bal Gangadhar Tilak, freshly released from prison,
Right.
and Annie Besant, originally from Ireland, but became a passionate advocate for Indian self-rule.
Exactly.
Can you tell us more about these two leaders?
Yeah, sure. So both Tilak and Besant were really committed to this idea of home rule for India, which basically meant greater self-governance within the British Empire.
Okay.
However, they had different approaches
I see.
and different support bases, which led them to form two separate home rule leagues in 1916.
Two separate leagues.
Yeah.
That sounds like it could have divided the movement.
Well, to some extent, it did. It made things a bit more complex. Tilak's league focused on specific regions,
Okay.
mainly Maharashtra, Karnataka, Central Provinces, and Berar. He kind of tailored his message to appeal to his existing base of support, which was particularly strong in those areas.
I see.
Interestingly, he also started advocating for the creation of linguistic states within India, a concept that wouldn't actually be realized until much later.
It's like he had a vision for the future.
Yeah.
What about Annie Besant? What was her approach like?
Besant's league, it had a broader all-India reach. She wanted to build a mass movement, something that went beyond regional and linguistic boundaries.
Okay.
Both leaders understood that despite their, different strategies, they shared that ultimate goal of home rule.
Right.
They recognized that even with two leagues, the movement would be stronger if they worked together towards this common objective.
So it was like a strategic decision to form two leagues,
Yeah.
catering to different groups,
Right.
but still maintaining that unified goal of home rule.
Exactly.
How did these leagues actually spread their message? How did they get support? What were their main strategies?
Well, they used some innovative methods to get the public engaged and build momentum. They organized public meetings, rallies, and processions
Right.
to spread awareness about home rule and generate enthusiasm. They also really cleverly used the power of the media,
Okay.
using newspapers and pamphlets to get their message out there and counter British propaganda.
So they were using a mix of traditional and modern methods to reach a wide audience. This sounds like a big change from the earlier phases of the nationalist movement.
It was. The Home Rule Leagues were actively reaching out to the masses, engaging people at the grassroots level, and empowering them to actually participate in the political process.
Okay.
This was a crucial shift because it broadened the base of the nationalist movement
Right.
and created a sense of ownership among ordinary Indians. The movement even attracted some moderates.
Oh, really?
Yeah, who were kind of disillusioned with the Congress Party's, lack of action after that split.
This growing momentum, I mean, it must have made the British government pretty nervous.
Yeah, you could say that.
What was their response to this surge in pro-independence sentiment?
Well, as you can imagine, the British authorities weren't thrilled about this growing movement.
Right.
They saw it as a direct challenge to their authority and responded with a series of repressive measures,
Okay.
basically aimed at curbing its influence.
What were some of those measures? How did they try to stop the movement?
They put restrictions on students participating in politics.
Okay.
They were afraid of the, radicalizing influence the movement might have on young minds.
I see.
They also took legal action against Tilak, trying to silence his powerful voice and limit his ability to organize.
Wow.
And in a really dramatic move, they arrested Annie Besant in June 1917.
Yep.
This sparked outrage across India.
Yeah.
It was a big deal.
Her arrest must have been a turning point for the movement. Like, it ignited even more resistance.
It did. People from all walks of life came out to support her. They saw her arrest as a blatant attack on the right to free speech and political dissent.
Yeah.
Sir S. Subramania Iyer,
Okay.
a very prominent lawyer and former judge, even renounced his knighthood in protest.
Wow.
These acts of resistance really highlighted the growing strength of the movement
Right.
and how deep public support for home rule ran.
So, even though the British government tried to suppress the Home Rule movement,
Right.
their actions actually had the opposite effect.
Yeah.
They just fueled the movement
Exactly.
and solidified public opinion against colonial rule.
Yeah. The British authorities found themselves in a tough spot. Their attempts to quell the movement just made it stronger. And the demand for home rule, it just got louder and louder. The British found themselves up against a movement that wasn't just resilient, but also strategically smart. Despite all that repression, the Home Rule League kept going. And that's where their focus on engaging with everyday Indians, really made a difference.
So it wasn't just about the big speeches and protests.
No, not at all.
They were working at the grassroots level, too.
Yeah, exactly. Think
Yeah.
about it. They set up libraries to, help with education and awareness.
Oh, okay.
They encouraged people to participate in local government.
Okay.
They even pushed for using Swadeshi.
For those who might not be familiar, Swadeshi is the idea of promoting Indian-made goods, right?
Yeah.
Like self-reliance as a way to challenge British economic control.
Exactly.
That's a powerful concept. It must have really resonated with people across India.
Oh, it did. The Home Rule movement managed to connect the fight for political autonomy with the everyday lives of Indians.
Yeah.
They weren't just demanding abstract rights, they were giving people concrete ways to participate in the struggle for a free India.
This resonated with a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
From different backgrounds, different ideologies.
Yes, it did. It attracted a wide range of people. While the movement was mostly led by educated Indians who really wanted a bigger say in their own governance, it also attracted those who hadn't been as involved in the nationalist movement before.
Okay.
And for our UPSC folks, this is important. The Home Rule movement showed a growing unity within Indian society, demonstrating that the desire for self-rule went beyond those ideological differences.
But as you mentioned earlier, not everyone was equally enthusiastic about the movement.
Right.
Are there any groups that felt left out or maybe apprehensive about the Home Rule League's goals?
Yes, and that's important to recognize. The movement wasn't, a single unified bloc. Some groups, particularly some Muslims and non-Brahmins in the South, were a bit wary of the movement.
Okay.
They worried that if power shifted from the British, it might just end up with the Hindu upper castes dominating.
That's a crucial point. Even within a movement fighting for a shared goal like independence, you can still have internal tensions and anxieties.
Absolutely. Understanding those complexities is key to getting the whole picture of the Home Rule movement.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a straightforward fight against the British. It was also about navigating the internal dynamics and worries within Indian society itself.
So despite its internal complexities, despite the British government's attempts to, crush it,
Right.
the Home Rule movement still had a lasting impact.
It did.
What would you say were his biggest contributions to India's journey toward independence?
Well, even though it didn't achieve full home rule, the movement forced the British to really face that growing demand for self-governance in India. It changed the political landscape and made it impossible for the British to just ignore the aspirations of the Indian people.
Right.
One of the most direct results of this pressure was the Montague Declaration of 1917.
Okay, the Montague Declaration.
Yeah, and UPSC aspirants take note, this is a key event.
This declaration was a big step, wasn't it? Can you tell us more about its significance and how it was connected to the Home Rule movement?
Absolutely. The Montague Declaration, announced by Edwin Montagu, the Secretary of State for India, marked a real turning point in British policy.
Okay.
For the first time, the British government officially said, okay, self-governance is a goal for India.
Wow.
It wasn't just about giving a few concessions anymore. The idea of India governing itself was now on the table.
This feels like a turning point. Was this a genuine change of heart from the British, or was it more of a tactical move to try and appease Indians during the war?
That's a great question, and historians are still debating it. Was it a true commitment to reform, or was it just a pragmatic response to wartime pressure and the growing strength of the nationalist movement?
I see.
But regardless of their motives, the declaration had a huge impact.
What kind of concrete changes came about because of the Montague Declaration?
Well, the declaration led to the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, which, though limited in scope, did introduce some degree of self-governance at the provincial level.
Okay.
That was a significant step, even though it wasn't the full home rule the movement was fighting for.
So a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But not quite the full leap to independence that many had hoped for.
Exactly. But it's crucial to remember that the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms and that shift in British policy they represent wouldn't have happened without the constant pressure from the Home Rule movement.
Right.
They made the British government acknowledge that growing demand for self-rule and actually engage in a real dialogue about India's future.
So even though it eventually faded, the movement seems like it played a crucial role in setting the stage for the later phases of the Indian independence struggle.
Absolutely. And that's what makes studying history so fascinating, seeing how seemingly unconnected events actually connect and influence each other.
Yeah.
The Home Rule movement may not have achieved its immediate goal, but it laid the groundwork for the mass mobilization and political awakening that would eventually lead to India's independence.
It's amazing to think about how the Home Rule movement didn't get that immediate goal of full self-governance.
Yeah.
But it really changed how India's fight for freedom went. You know, it's like this ripple effect.
Right.
The actions of one generation just kind of carry the next one forward.
Exactly. As we move into the 1920s and beyond, we can see echoes of the Home Rule movement in the strategies and approaches of leaders like Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah, Gandhi coming onto the Indian political scene, that was a huge moment.
It was.
He brought with him this unique approach to resistance,
Yeah.
which he had, developed and refined in South Africa.
Right.
Satyagraha, a philosophy of nonviolent resistance.
And it's really interesting because Gandhi's approach was in many ways inspired by the Home Rule movement.
Oh, really?
He admired Tilak's focus on mass mobilization and that use of Swadeshi
Okay.
to challenge British economic power.
So it's like Gandhi was able to take all these different parts of the nationalist movement
Right.
and bring them together,
Yeah.
drawing inspiration from figures like Tilak and Besant,
Exactly.
but at the same time forging his own unique path.
He did.
Yeah.
And for those preparing for the UPSC exams, this is something to remember.
Okay.
Understanding how leaders like Gandhi built on the foundations laid by earlier movements.
Yeah.
Gandhi recognized the power of nonviolent resistance
Right.
as this way to unite Indians across religious and caste lines.
Yeah.
It was something that resonated with the masses, and it really resonated with India's cultural and spiritual values.
Satyagraha really became like the defining characteristic of the Indian independence movement.
It did.
What do you think made it so effective in challenging British rule?
Well, it created this moral dilemma for the British by refusing to meet violence with violence.
Yeah.
The Satyagrahis exposed I guess you could say, the brutality of the colonial regime.
Right.
And gained sympathy from people all around the world.
Okay.
It also gave power to ordinary Indians,
Right.
allowing them to be a part of the fight for freedom without having to resort to violence.
So even though the Home Rule movement was important on its own,
Absolutely.
it also really helped to set the stage
Right.
for that mass mobilization that would define the later parts of the independence movement.
It did.
It's almost like it was a training ground, getting the Indian people ready for the challenges and the triumphs that were to come.
That's a really good way to put it. It created this sense of political consciousness.
Right.
A belief that self-rule wasn't just some far-off dream, but something real, something worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And as we know, that fight for freedom ultimately led to India's independence in 1947.
Looking back, what are some of the key lessons we can take away from the Home Rule movement?
Sure.
What insights from this part of Indian history are still relevant today?
I think one of the most powerful lessons is the importance of persistent and strategic activism.
Yeah.
You know, the Home Rule Leagues didn't achieve their immediate goal of full self-governance,
Right.
but they kept the pressure on the British government, forcing them to acknowledge India's aspirations,
Yeah.
which eventually led to some pretty significant policy changes.
Right.
It's a reminder that even when you're facing what seem like impossible obstacles,
Yeah.
sustained effort can bring about real meaningful change.
It also shows the power of collective action, right?
Definitely.
And the ability of ordinary people to actually shape history.
Absolutely. The Home Rule movement wasn't just about a handful of charismatic leaders.
Right.
It was about thousands upon thousands of Indians across the country who came together and demanded a better future for themselves and for their nation.
Well, that brings our deep dive into the Home Rule movement to an end.
It does.
We've explored its beginnings, the key figures, its successes,
Right.
the challenges it faced, and its lasting impact on India's path to independence.
It's been a great discussion.
We hope you found it insightful, especially for all those new UPSC aspirants out there.
Yes, for those preparing for the UPSC exams,
Yeah.
the Home Rule movement is a vital topic to study. It really highlights these themes of nationalism, political mobilization,
Right.
and how the relationship between Britain and India evolved over time.
And for everyone else, we hope this deep dive gave you a glimpse into this fascinating and crucial chapter in India's history.
We did.
And if this deep dive piqued your curiosity,
Yeah.
we encourage you to check out the resources we mentioned in the show notes.
Definitely. There's so much more to discover about this incredible period in India's past.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. That way you won't miss any of our future deep dives.
We look forward to seeing you then.
We'll see you on our next deep dive.